Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show. Glad to have you guys here on the 7th, Wednesday, the 7th of February, 2023. Thank you for tuning in. We're going to get started here. First thing I wanted to show you guys is the banking problems are not over. What I want you to follow is the red line. The red line is the small banks, their cash available and stuff. And now you can see the big banks, the large banks, that's the green line. They're not having any trouble. An awful lot of cash flows coming into the big banks. It's leaving the small banks. And that's because people in the know, they're worried. You know, your smaller credit institutions and banks, they're heading toward, well, it's sort of a banking consolidation. They're consolidating power in the larger banking system, closer to the Fed. Closer to the Fed's reach into these larger banks. And you always never forget about this. Keep this in mind if you got bank accounts and stuff, and you do business with a smaller bank. Keep this in mind. Okay. Now in Brussels, they're targeting 90% cut of all greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2040. Now, remember those tractors are over there in Europe? They're really upset. They're blocking roads. They're doing everything they can because there's just so many laws coming down to them from Brussels, from this bureaucratic system. But no, they're not cutting. They're not easing back the throttle any. Brussels isn't. They're going for this 90% cut in all greenhouse gases by 2040. That's a huge cut in emissions. So, what's going to be the end result of all this? Well, I'm just going to read a little bit of it here. It says the European Union must slash greenhouse gas emissions by 90%. This was said. This is what Brussels said on Tuesday. Its recommendation aimed at ensuring climate neutrality becomes a reality by the mid-century. It says the target is necessary to keep the European Union aligned with the 2015 Paris Agreement, which committed nations to keeping the Earth's long-term average temperature well below 2 degrees Celsius. And prefer below 1.5 degrees Celsius, a goal that each year represents appears to slip further away. So the farmers, I don't know how much of an impact they're blocking roads and parking their tractors. It seems, I'll tell you what it seems to me like nowadays. It seems to me like protests are that the powers that be, and they kind of wait the protests out until the people finally get tired of protesting and go home. And then they go back to what they were doing again, basically with very little effect, so to speak. And it seems to me that's the way things have been going quite recently, you know. Going back to the protests around Paris that started with the Yellow Vest movement. We all remember that. And it did, in time, it kind of faded out. Because people can only protest so long, and if the government just... Basically, I guess this is their new... I remember a time... There was a time when protests, peaceful protests and stuff, would get a response. Would have an effect. But it's almost like that medicine is becoming inactive and not working good. Kind of like your antibiotics, you know, the doctors, some of these infections now, they don't respond to the antibiotics any longer. Anyway, maybe that's not the greatest analogy, but that's the way I see it. Now, you know, the war over there in Israel, on the Gaza Strip between Hamas and Israel, it says that Blinken believes that there's an agreement is possible with Hamas. We continue to believe that an agreement is possible, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken tells reporters. He's discussing the responses from Hamas to propose a deal with Israel tomorrow. The deal was presented to Hamas following talks between Egypt, the U.S., and Qatar. And there's Blinken shaking hands with somebody in Qatar. I think it's in Qatar, I'm not sure. Now, Yemen, the Yemeni Houthis. Now, these are the guys who responded to Israel's attack on Hamas, is the Houthis. They joined in the war, sort of, more or less. They declared war anyway, quite some time ago. They just keep coming. They just keep coming, and they keep coming, and they keep coming. No matter how hard you hit them, they just keep coming. There are 2 more ships attacked in the Red Sea area. This is going to have a compounding effect upon shipping. And in fact, we're all going to notice it. Shipping costs are going to go up. Meanwhile, in Moscow, Putin is going to have an interview with Tucker Carlson. Moscow's confirmed it. The Kremlin said an interview was granted because Carlson was neither pro-Russian nor pro-Ukrainian. And unlike it said it in other Western media, it says here, in the Guardian. Russian President Vladimir Putin granted an interview to U.S. television host Tucker Carlson on Tuesday, the Kremlin said, claiming it was arranged because Carlson's approach differs from the one-sided reporting of many traditional Western news media. Wow. Now, talk about a big story. Actually doing an interview with Vladimir Putin, that is a big story. That is really impressive. And probably the whole world is going to be watching this interview when it actually occurs. I know I'm going to want to watch it. Be very interesting. Now, the live charts for silver today. Silver's on the upswing, on the uptick a little bit, but it's within a very narrow trading band or trading range right now. It and gold. And that trading range right now is running between 22.20 for silver and 22.50. And right now today is at 22.36. Now I want to say something about this. About things. The Feds did a lot of talk. There was a lot of talk going on about a soft landing. After all of this interest rate hiking and quantitative tightening. I'm kind of hoping they do get a soft landing. Either way it goes, hard landing, soft landing, it's going to be inflation on the other side of this. Because that's the way the monetary system is structured for inflation. It has been for the last over 100 years. We saw 98 or 99% of our dollar eat away to inflation. That's not going to stop. It's going to get to a point in the end where people lose confidence in the purchasing power of the dollar. But we're not there yet. And if they can accomplish a soft landing, they will buy us a couple extra years before we start to hit the point where people lose confidence in the dollar. I would say they'll buy us probably 24 months if they can achieve their soft landing. And I'm not going to say they can't. Because they did surprise me, the fact that they got away with raising interest rates so fast all the way up to 5%. But it's going to cost them in the debt. The reason why I didn't think that they could do it is I said, before they did all this, I said they can't normalize rates. Well, they've somewhat normalized rates by bringing rates up to 5%. without the economy completely crashing. The economy hasn't completely crashed. So I was wrong. They could do it. They did it, but it's going to cost them, because now to service the United States debt right now is costing like $1 trillion a year. It's costing more than the entire United States defense budget, and the United States defense budget is the largest defense budget in the world by far. So they've reached the limit, though. They can't go higher, because if they go higher, what are they going to pay? $2 trillion a year, $5 trillion a year, if they raise rates higher. So they've paused. They've stopped. Well, what does that mean? It means they've reached the climax, the peak, the pinnacle. The only place left to go for interest rates now is down. The question mark, the big question mark, is how long can they maintain this before they bring interest rates back down? Back down means more inflation. And ultimately, that's where we're going. But if they can achieve their soft landing, maintain higher rates for longer, achieve their soft landing, they will buy us some time with the dollar. And maybe that's what they were trying to do in the first place, the whole way through all this process, was trying to buy time, because that's all they can do is buy time. Ultimately, we're going to end up with massive inflation. And at a certain point, when the real inflation starts to hit, probably after they start lowering interest rates, we're going to see precious metals. They've been suppressed for so long, that when they finally start to break free, we're going to see multiples of the price you're seeing now. So it makes it a very good place to put your savings, or part of your portfolio. And so, of these precious metals, I consider silver to be the best place for the average Joe out there. I mean, okay, some people, maybe gold's a better fit. If you've got a little bit more money than the average Joe, and you can compress money in a smaller, tighter area. Like, for instance, say you're not the average Joe, say you're a upper middle class or whatever. You can afford $1 million worth of gold, right? Let's just say. Well, you can fit that in a suitcase. And not that big of a suitcase. It only weighs like 50 pounds. But what would $1 million of silver look like? You ain't going to go carrying that around on your shoulder, I'll tell you that. You ain't even going to carry it in a wheelbarrow. You need about 4 wheelbarrows to carry $1 million worth of silver. But for the average guy out there, average stacker out there, maybe a stack that weighs 20 pounds or something might be a really good size average Joe out there who wants to put a little bit of extra money away. And silver's fine. You can carry 20 pounds of silver, or 10 pounds even. But how far will that go when this system finally breaks apart? Believe me, this stuff could go 10 times. Well, when you got a hyperinflating dollar, it could go more than that. I've heard stories, from places like Germany, back when they had their Weimar hyperinflation. And that was a big deal, People who had the German mark, the mark went down and was worth almost nothing. And people were still selling things, but for gold and for silver. And some people actually just used a very small amount of gold to buy massive things now that would be, you couldn't even think about affording it. I heard stories that they were able to buy like a whole city block in Berlin, for like 10 ounces of gold. Well, a whole city block in Berlin, downtown Berlin, what would that be worth today? $1 trillion maybe? I don't know. You couldn't buy it, I guarantee you that. Certainly not for just a 10 ounce of gold. No way. Or was it 7 ounces of gold? Something like that. But stuff like that happens during a hyperinflation. That's what I'm trying to say. These guys out there, you might see them and it says you can buy a house for 100 ounces of silver. Yeah, stuff like that does happen during hyperinflations. Things that people need, like food and stuff, go up astronomically high. But other things like real estate, things that people don't have to have, they'll let go of them so they can feed themselves. It gets that bad. And they'll let go of them cheap. Things like cars and land and stuff like that ordinarily are good investment opportunities and things like that. But it goes down to wants and needs. And that's what I was doing in my show yesterday. I was pointing out about wants and needs. Things you want, things you need. If they know you got you over a barrel, the things you absolutely have to have, the needs in life to sustain your life, they'll jack the price up on those things and keep jacking them up, and they'll hyperinflate with the hyperinflation. But people will sell a lot of the things that they don't really need to have in order to buy the things they really need to have. And that actually keeps the price the same or keeps the price down somewhat against the backdrop of the hyperinflation. And any currency or anything that's liquidity in a hyperinflation that's outside the hyperinflating currency itself becomes a trading item for commodities. And almost everything you buy can be termed as a commodity. I mean, we don't really list things like houses and real estate as commodities and cars and stuff like that. But in a hyperinflation, those things are commodities, more or less, And if they're not something that's needed for life, then people are selling the things they need for life and letting go of things that they can't, in order to feed themselves. So the price can come. Actually, they don't move up as fast. But liquidity, pure liquidity that's used in trade outside the currency that's hyperinflating, that becomes the thing that really shoots to the moon. And the reason why it shoots to the moon is because it is actually effectively fighting against the loss in value of the currency. Things like Bitcoin, gold, silver, those are liquidity items. In a hyperinflation, everybody's, I don't want these dollars, because picture you're in a hyperinflation and the dollar's losing, say, 20% of its value daily. It means if you keep that dollar, tomorrow it's going to be worth 20% less. But gold and silver, say, at that point in time, are going up 50% a day higher, or 20%, or at least 20%, but higher. Well, if you want to switch from one form of liquidity to a different form of liquidity, then at that point, you're desperate to get out of the dollar, because say you got $1 million at that point in time, and it's only going to be worth $800,000 tomorrow, and that piece of gold there, maybe today it's worth $10,000, and tomorrow it'll be worth $12,000. You want to get out of the dollar because you want to get into the gold, and the guy that's got the gold, he might not want to sell it to you because he knows it's going to be worth 20% more tomorrow, and he knows what you're holding is going to be worth 20% less tomorrow. So the only way you're going to get that piece of gold for him is you're going to have to offer him more than what it's actually worth. Because he's got something good that's on an elevator that's going up, and you got something bad that's on an elevator that's going down to sell. This is simply, gold today, $20.39 today for gold. Now cryptocurrency, $43,034 for Bitcoin. To think you could have had them for a nickel a piece back in 2010. To think one guy, he actually traded 7,000 of them for a pizza. Thought he got a good deal. That was the most expensive pizza in the history of the world. Ethereum today, $23.81, and XRP is at 50 cents. Now, the Dow Jones Industrial Average today is up 145 points at 38,667. Crude oil is at 73.77. It's up 46 cents. Bonds and rates, what we're looking at is the U.S. 10 years at 4.1, and it's up 1 basis point, and the U.S. 30 years at 4.31, and it's up 1.5 basis points. I wonder if somehow they're backdooring money into the system to give them their soft landing. I'm very suspicious of that. Why we haven't seen it yet. Why we haven't seen a crash in the markets and stuff yet. What in the heck's going on? Why? How did it hold through all of this without a steep decline and even setting new highs in the market? Without when they're withdrawing so-called withdrawing liquidity from the system, it's like a magic trick that they're performing, because they got a three-legged table here, and they've just pulled a leg out from under the table, and it's levitating all on its own. How are they doing that without supporting it with money behind the scenes? That's why I'm so suspicious that they're doing something. There's some finagling way that I can't see that they're pumping massive amounts of liquidity in somehow. Because the banks are not lending like they were, and that's the biggest form of new money creation. I know part of it could be that they've just a lot of people have withdrawn on their credit cards. They've bought and purchased things with their credit cards to the tune of over $1 trillion in credit card debt. That would help, because that creates new money too. Whenever you go out and you purchase something with your credit card, you've just created money. But now on the other side of that, if they don't get that money back, then the banks have a hole, a black hole of the banking systems that support these big credit card companies like Visa is the biggest, They have a black hole if they don't receive payment. These are non-performing. And this might help to work on the other side to withdraw liquidity from the system at a certain point when people can't pay that money back. How many credit card delinquencies are there right now? How many people out there are like are just not even making the minimum payments? You gotta take that into consideration, because we're talking about over $1 trillion here. And then there's student debt. It's big. Anyway, 104.7 on the US dollar index today, and she's going along sideways. Thank you guys for listening to my show. Push that thumbs up button, and we'll catch you guys in the next episode. Bye-bye.